CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color.
They are inserting an issue that does not even exist. It's not in our curriculum, and it's not in our lesson plans, and it shouldn't even be in our conversations.
I'm a white woman with children in Stafford schools. I want them to learn about our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
My children have to think that they're guilty of some crime that they haven't committed because of the color of their skin. I mean, I can't believe we're having this conversation.
This is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Crisis in the Classroom.
As we continue to travel around the nation to report on the educational crisis, we see that the story remains the same. Children everywhere are failing to receive a good quality education, costing them their futures and, for many, their livelihood. Instead of uplifting young people to learn, we dumb them down the curriculum. Teachers are losing motivation, inspiration, dedication, and students are bearing the brunt. Oh boy, are they bearing the brunt. What can we do to foster an environment where children are motivated, inspired, can't wait to get up in the morning to go learn and pick up a book instead of a gun? With that, we turn to a bill that calls for closer scrutiny in South Carolina's classrooms. It passed through the South Carolina House this year. It's known as the South Carolina Transparency and Integrity in Education Act. Supporters say it's a way to stick to the state education standards. Opponents tells us it opened the doors to censorship. Our investigative reporter, Annie Emerson, reports on why is this bill so controversial.
A vote of 73 to 40, House Bill 5183 is amended.
Amended after efforts to stall it by Democrats, including Representative J.A. Moore, ultimately failed.
This bill is a censorship bill.
Moore says this bill was a political ploy by the right to get more votes from its base before the primary season kicks off. Some of his colleagues agree.
Bad things happen in history does not mean we should not be able to talk about it. You cannot erase it.
The bill's supporters say this is not about preventing instruction of our storied history. It's just an effective tool to monitor it.
The intent of this bill is to establish a transparent policy for teachers, parents, and students to maintain a high-quality education not clouded by bias on race, ethnicity, class, nationality, religion, or geographic.
I can applaud the efforts of the House Education Committee to be highly receptive to public feedback.
That's Palmetto State Teachers Association Patrick Kelly. He says the House took over 18 hours of public testimony from more than 100 individuals while crafting this bill. But even so, he's concerned that while reflection is good for a teacher, second-guessing heated conversations over controversial topics like race could be less positive.
We don't need to be chilling conversation in classrooms right now. We need to be enhancing conversations and giving students opportunities to engage and exercise the civic discourse muscles they're going to need as active citizens in our democracy.
Ultimately, the bill failed to pass in the state Senate in this legislative session last year. 14 states passed legislation that revolved around restricting teaching certain concepts, including critical race theory. I want to bring in Candace Arbathay, Superintendent of the Marion County School District. Superintendent Arbathay, welcome to the broadcast.
Good afternoon.
You know, while the teachers, the administrators, the legislators find themselves embroiled in this situation, superintendents like yourself all over South Carolina care about one thing, and that is the fact that education is so critical to any person's upbringing. Yet it seems to be the case that we are more willing to inject politics into it than we have ever been before. You could just tell by the footage that you and I both witnessed. We see so much critical race theory, Ms. Bethea, being taught in classrooms with children feeling as though they must feel sorry about their race, their heritage, stirring anger in some, deranged individuals, and causing them to view other races as their enemy. And all we have to do is look to Buffalo, where that young man, 18 years old, decided that he wanted to target black people because his way of life is changing. He has become the enemy of the state. He believes that white men are the most marginalized minority in America now. Is critical race theory truly bettering our children, or is it making them angry, bitter, brawling over the things that they cannot control, like pulling out firearms and killing for no reason at all?
Just due to the overall sensitivity of the matter, I am very guarded in my comments on the topic, as I do believe that as the critical race theory conversation evolves, the meaning of it has changed over time, and there are just varying opinions on even the definition of what it really means, what it looks like, what it is in practice. But what I will tell you, that as educators, what we do is we teach inclusiveness and we teach belonging. That is the most important thing. We have to teach everyone that we have to value the opinions, value the cultures, value the backgrounds and beliefs of others. And so that has been our focus in our system. And we teach history, the facts of history, the positives, as well as some of those things that may not be viewed as positive as well. But trying to have a balanced perspective, but also when we're teaching, making sure that we are providing information from diverse backgrounds and diverse cultures. Because in America, we make up I don't want to use the term a melting pot, but we are a country of just diverse backgrounds. I mean, we probably have one of the largest, I guess I would say, racial compositions or diverse compositions. And so we have to make sure that we are valuing and including all.
It is obvious you're very sensitive to these topics. And as a leader and as a superintendent, you're very careful in how you answer this. And I can feel the emotions and the angst from this conversation. So let me say this sort of in a more tender and gingerly way. The Buffalo shooter showed a shocking amount of deliberation. It proved how conscious he was when he was committing the atrocity. You could hear the sincerity, no matter how you want to take it, in his voice, how sorry he truly was for pointing a gun at a person of what he considered to be the wrong race. The question, Superintendent Bethea, that we need to ask ourselves is what educational experience, whether in or outside the classroom, would steer a person to engage in such despicable conduct?
Well, it's twofold. One, I think, especially in this day and age, as we see the mental health data and statistics is at an all-time high when it comes to youth. Normally, that has been a thing of this. That's for the adult population. But we've seen over the last 2 years, if you look at research from the American Pediatric Association, and it shows where mental health cases in our young population is at an all-time high. And so I go back to the social emotional learning piece, and I know that term is overused, but from where I sit, it's not used enough. It is real, making sure that the emotional, the mental health is addressed in the classroom, addressed at the home front as well. And I say the home front because it just cannot be just us as educators tackling, but because of where some of our youth are, that we have to work together between school and home, and just making sure that social, emotional, and mental health component, that we're addressing it, making sure that students and our youth are getting the wraparound services that they need when the resources within our school systems are not enough to address their sometimes severe concerns. And so looking at it from a social emotional perspective, I think is important, and working with the homes. And again, I just go back to making sure that we are teaching inclusiveness, that we're teaching valuing each other, and we're teaching our students to be sensitive to the beliefs of others. And so what would drive someone to that point? I don't know enough about that young man's story, but I know many stories of children within our community and what they need for adults to acknowledge when there are concerns, and that we also as adults model what we expect of children, model those behaviors, model that we know how to get along with others, model that when there is an issue, it's okay to get help, it's okay to go to a therapist, it's okay to get the supports that you need.
In less than a minute, what do you think the most tremendous progress you've said that you've made in terms of the educational experience where it's really making a remarkable difference?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Where you've made the greatest progress in making sure that these kids have an environment where they can learn and can become contributing citizens?
I think that making sure that human capital, making sure that we have people within our schools, our staff, that are charged with taking care and contributing to the academic performance of children, believe in our children, and that they are there to make a difference and to make an impact. And it goes beyond just showing up because it's a job, but that you know the impact, the implications of the work that you do, not only for this child for right now, but on our entire society as a whole. We're molding as educators the next generation of leaders, the next generation of students, the next generation that's going to add to our economy. And so making sure that we have people within our schools that know the power of their influence, that know the power of their impact, and that are there to work to make sure that our students are in a much better place when they leave them from when they enter those classrooms.
Superintendent Candace Bethea from my hometown of Marion County, thank you so much for joining us. Joining me now to discuss, Dr. Lawrence Scott, Assistant Professor of Educational Leadership at Texas A&M University, San Antonio, and Angela Marabito, spokesperson for the Defense of Freedom Institute and former spokesperson for the Department of Education in the Trump administration. Professor Scott, let me start with you. How does one create a school environment where there are clearly defined roles for teachers and students that fosters the best environment and also gives strong emphasis to discipline where all strategic partners are on board and agree?
Absolutely. So the answer to that question is it's going to be in layers, right? I would say it starts absolutely with a partnership between the school, I teach at a class school, community relations, but with the school and the community, right? Common unity. So that's first. Secondly, your principals. I was an administrator for a number of years, and one of the things we specialized in is reaching out to our parents in a collaborative effort and making sure that our parents are wildly informed about the protocol and procedures of discipline. If there, usually districts have a clear discipline protocol, and then also, administrative procedures, but then also making sure that there's some latitude that, and that comes through the conversations that principals are going to have with the community. And then thirdly, get stakeholders involved, get organizations involved. We got churches involved in our schools to help us mentor our students. We got, 100 Black men and other faith-based organizations to come in and help us mentor our kids. Because again, the hope is that we're building a pipeline so that when the students leave our facility, that they will be purveyors of leadership within the community.
Ms. Marabito, do you agree that there should be state laws supporting families over teachers?
Well, I don't believe that families and teachers are necessarily in conflict. I think that both of them need to be partners in getting the next generation educated, and that parents need to be in the driver's seat. So I am all for laws that protect the rights of parents, especially curriculum transparency. Parents deserve to know what their kids are being taught, and they deserve to have the ultimate say in their child's education, and everything from school choice, where they go to school, to the ways that they learn best. And that doesn't mean that they're running in opposition to the teachers. It just means that they have to work together, and parents need to have the ultimate authority.
And how do you feel the teachers can be more effective?
Well, I think teachers know their classrooms the best, and that what works really well in one classroom may not work so well in another. But what every teacher needs to do is to get to know their students as individuals. When you see these things coming up in the world like critical race theory, all that does is divide students from one another. So teachers need to get away from that. They need to get back to teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. They need to be teaching kids, what a pronoun is, instead of asking them what their pronouns are. We have to get indoctrination out of the classroom, and that's something that every teacher can do to get back to their mission of really educating kids.
Professor Scott, how can we break through the barriers and teach our youth to see the value and promise in education?
So there's again, that is multi-systemic. Again, there was a study, the silent epidemic, that talked about most of the people that drop out because school wasn't interesting. So I think we need to have a curricula that is reflective of their experiences. That's part of that critical race theory argument. That's the counter storytelling, telling the story from the vantage point of those who are traditionally disempowered. But then also we need to make sure our teachers are adequately trained in culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogy. And then also making sure that we're building a pipeline of teachers that look and resemble and embrace the cultural ethos of our students and the community. And so one of the things we have done, and if you go to my website, drlawrencescott.com, you'll see a lot of our research that we've done, basically is how do we build that pipeline of teachers that are conversant with the needs of the students. Kind of like what Ms. Morbido said, knowing every student by name and need. But again, you gotta be intentional. And in order to do that, your leadership has to be right and ready.
Ms. Morbido, toxic sex education, many parents feel, does not belong in the classroom. There may be a place for it after school if the parents opt for it and feel there's something their child should be exposed to.
Yeah, parents need to be in the driver's seat, and I believe that schools should be offering an education rooted in facts across all subjects. That really shouldn't be a political issue, nor should it be controversial to say that parents have the final say. What I do take issue with is when teachers think that they can use the classroom as a vehicle to indoctrinate students. There is no reason for a teacher to get up in front of the class and talk about their own sexuality, their own sexual orientation. What their private life is their private life. I'm not going to make any statement about that at all. It just doesn't belong in the classroom. And parents across the political spectrum really tend to agree on this. It's why you see support for things like the parents' rights bills that we've seen in places like Florida, where it says, okay, go live your life. You have your rights and your freedoms, and that's part of what makes this country great. But what you don't have the right to do is make your personal life someone else's child's learning material. There's just no room for it in the classroom.
Professor Scott, Governor Henry McMaster's recently here in the state of South Carolina, and we're broadcasting from WCIV, ABC4 in Charleston, signed a bill in the law. Listen, I want to start with this on where it talks about biological males. Is it fair for biological boys who identify as girls to be competing in girls' sports?
So I think that's more of a Title IX issue, and I would leave those particular issues definitely with the whatever the procedures of the district would be. Again, I know there's federal guidelines and a Title IX issue, so I don't think I'm apt to answer that question. I know as an administrator, what I've done when we had any issues with Title IX, we would of course look at the black and white delineation of our procedures and board policy, and then we would implement the best policy that would be inclusive to all students And so if we need to modify, here in Texas, we had the bathroom bill and everything. So if we needed to modify certain things for certain students, we made those affordances because we wanted to make sure that all students felt welcome when they come to our school.
Dr. Lawrence Scott and Angela Morabito, I thank you both for your commitment to education and your leadership. And I think it's so critical that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle we're on. What we must do is create an environment that is efficient and effective and uplifting for our children to learn in. And I think you both do that very well, and we're very happy to have you on this part of our Crisis in Education. And thank you again for joining us. Up next, we continue our special coverage of Crisis in the Classroom with insight from South Carolina's Commissioner of Higher Education. That's coming up next. The battle over controversial topics like critical race theory has led to big wins for conservative school board candidates in Texas. Local races turned out voters and big funding from political action committees. The National Desk, Ryan Smith, reports on what this means for the upcoming midterm elections this fall.
School board elections dominated by culture wars could be an early preview of what's to come in November. Those controversial topics proving to be a winning strategy for conservative campaigns in Texas and beyond. Texas conservatives taking a victory lap. Governor Greg Abbott tweeting, "Conservatives won school board elections across Texas. The power of parents will continue to expand in Texas." NBC News tracking more than 40 candidates across 20 suburban Texas school board elections focused on culture war issues like banning critical race theory.
And so we have a number of parents who are enraged by some of the content that they see in the schools, and they're turning out. And in a low turnout election, that'll make a really big difference, especially like these types of local school board elections.
The 1776 Project, a New York-based political action committee, calling Saturday a clean sweep after funneling out-of-state campaign cash to more than a dozen races. All 15 of our endorsed candidates in Texas school board races won their elections on Saturday.
They don't want this radical approach to education being pushed. They don't want this racist approach. Critical race theory is state-sanctioned racism.
Packed, fiery school board meetings sparked a national conversation about how involved parents should be in their child's curriculum. Though some school officials now warn of misinformation and the politicalization of school boards at times resulting in threats against teachers and staff.
And that has become even more of a hot button issue for parents.
Political experts say parental rights issues now putting Democrats on defense.
Because if you have to engage with people on an issue they're already fired up about, then you can look like you're explaining. And we have a saying in politics that if you're explaining, you're losing.
And conservative candidates running on this platform have seen resistance in some areas. In Colorado, for example, candidates backed by teachers associations won in Denver and several other surrounding districts. And in many states, last fall, it came down to parents wanting to see a fresh face voted in versus an incumbent. In Washington, I'm Ryan Smith for the National Desk.
For more, now we welcome South Carolina's Commissioner on Higher Education, Terry Seckinger. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we touched on this with our earlier guests, the importance of principals, superintendents, and the leadership of the school, because everything starts there.
That's exactly right. And the leadership of the school has been totally, parents have been boxed out. They're the taxpayers. They pay for all of this. And they've been totally boxed out in terms of who is going to lead their school. And I think years ago, we had parent councils for our schools, at individual schools. And those parent councils need to come back and be involved in not only the hiring of the teacher, not unilaterally, but be a part of that, because they need to have a stake in the game, because they pay all the bills and it's their children that are being taught. And these teachers that are hired, I have to tell you, I served on the State Board of Education for South Carolina, and when I left that board, each individual member gives a charge to the board. My charge to our board was to not hire former felons who had just gotten out of prison to be teacher leaders in our classrooms. Parents have a stake in education, and they deserve to have a right at the table when teachers are hired, when curriculum is being presented.
Why not felons?
Well, felons, the role of teachers in the classroom are really teacher, leader, mentors. I don't believe a former convicted felon would be a proper mentor for young minds and young students in classrooms. There are a lot of people that would be appropriate. I don't believe convicted felons would be appropriate.
You don't think they can be reformed?
I think they can be reformed, but I think there are many other things they can do besides be teacher mentors in classrooms.
Wow. There's a crisis in the classroom. There's a crisis with discipline. There's a crisis with the lack of teacher skill and training. How do we elevate the teachers in the classroom?
You know, the teachers feel really called. A good teacher feels called to teach. And teachers are taxed so much with what is required of them, as opposed to letting them soar with their strengths, get to know their students, and impart knowledge to their students. This is a highly regulated, really behemoth corporation, this public education. And teachers are leaving the classroom because they're so overburdened and they're dumped on all the time with tertiary things that don't involve actually imparting knowledge. And they're constantly assessed, and they'd rather go do something else for the money that they make in the classroom. It's very sad. We are losing very good teachers in the classroom.
How important are after-school opportunities?
They are very important. And I have to tell you, why are our schools shut down at 4 o'clock? Why can you not have remediation opportunities for students that are lagging behind, not with the teachers that really taught during the day, but with another set of teachers that would come in the afternoon and maybe present a different approach to the problem where the child is not getting academically what they should, and remediate that child. That school is paid for by taxpayers in the area. The school should be utilized in the afternoon and in the evenings as well, and that would really help.
What about the school district's transfer policies? And then you have this issue with these ghost students.
Well, in my opinion, I think every school district should have an open enrollment policy. You know, not every school fits the child that lives in that particular area. And districts ought to offer different types of educational opportunities for the district. And open enrollment would be, you have a period of enrollment. The parent would enroll the child in the school in the district where the parent thinks the child should be best suited. And when that school is full, that school is locked out and not available for enrollment. Why do we not have that? Because parents know best their students. Teachers don't know best their students. And we need to give parents an opportunity to be involved in education. After all, they're paying for all of this.
You know, Governor McMaster, as I mentioned earlier, signed the Save Women's Sports Act, which bans transgender students from playing girls or women's sports in public schools and colleges. You were an athlete, and you can speak to this issue.
I played volleyball, Mr. Armstrong, for Clemson University. Our son played football for Dabo Sweeney at Clemson University. If my 6'5", 250-pound tight end played volleyball, he wouldn't kill me, but he would hurt me very badly. If I tried to play football on the Clemson football team, I would be killed. This is insane, where you have these transgender students thinking they can go play on another gender's team. It's insane. Everyone knows it's insane, except these people that want to somehow forge some ridiculous path to really injure themselves. And I'm very grateful that our governor, who I think is an excellent governor, has signed this bill, and our legislature has given it to him.
What about educating our special need kids?
Special needs children really are, in my opinion, boxed into a cookie cutter type program. Every child is different. And our special needs children, right now, they're mainstreamed in the traditional classroom, which does two bad things, in my opinion. It doesn't help the special needs child, and it holds back the rigor of the regular classroom. Years ago, our special needs children were completely separated from the mainstream classroom. My recommendation would be to have a hybrid model where you have special needs classes for children that have special needs and are specifically geared for them. And then there are other classes that these children could be mainstreamed in to see how the other folks work in a classroom. I think that's the best model. We have thrown that out the window and have mainstreamed everything. And it really does hold our children back, both special needs and non-special needs. And our scores are going down. And I don't understand why they don't really take a look afresh at our special needs children.
You know, discipline is a harsh issue in schools for the teachers, for the students that want to learn, for the administrators. How do we get under control where students can do whatever they want in the classroom, be disruptive?
Well, I'll have to tell you, children that are disruptive, they're really crying out for help. And you might have a child, I served on a juvenile parole board for South Carolina. You might have a child that has had no food for the last 24 hours or has been abused sexually or physically the night before. And that child's going to act out in school. Why do we not have competent counselors? I'm not saying they're all incompetent, but competent counselors that can pull that child out of the classroom and caringly and lovingly find out what really is the problem for that child and get appropriate help. Because children that act out in the classroom really are crying out for help. They're not able to learn because their life is a mess. And to understand that, this is just how human nature works. And to understand that, I think, would really help not only the child in need, but the classroom in terms of its discipline.
And with about a minute left, why is it so important for parents to have school choice?
That is really important. I have to tell you, right now, school thinks that they know their children more than the parents do. Parents know their children best of all, and parents should be in charge of where their children go to public school, not just to pull them out and take them to private school. I've started a private school, but I've had both my children in public school and private school, our children have been. And so parents know best, but parents have been totally boxed out of the education decision making and are forced to go to a particular school. That's why choice within every school district is critically important. I think parents would love that.
Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Stay with us. Our panel joins us next on this Crisis in the Classroom Town Hall. Welcome back to this Crisis in the Classroom Town Hall. Parents in many school districts around the country are taking the reins. They're running for local school boards, so they have a say in the decisions that directly impact their children. Andrew James from our Asheville, North Carolina station has this report.
A local political science professor tells me that more and more parents are now throwing their hats in the ring for school board positions. And while the reasons may vary, the enthusiasm is strong.
School board meetings, once considered mundane by some, are now home to some of the fiercest debates in our community.
I am not leaving until you do a revote
for the people.
This happening at a Buncombe County School Board meeting back in August. The topic of discussion, masks in classrooms.
Is this something that you ever considered in the past, running for public office, running for a school board position?
Not in a million years.
Liza English Kelly is a local parent now running for the Asheville City Board of Education. She tells me her reason isn't masks, instead the recent decision to close Asheville Primary School. This video shows parents leaving a meeting last month as board members voted on the controversial topic.
Get your facts right.
To think about like playing a very real role in the decisions that impact not only our children, but children of generations to come is really an exciting thing.
These local school boards have taken on sort of renewed political importance.
Dr. Chris Cooper, a political science professor with Western Carolina University, tells me there are around 10,000 school boards across the country, and more parents are now fighting to have a seat at the table where decisions are made.
Whether it's arguments, again, over coronavirus response, over critical race theory, over identity politics, the national and the local are increasingly blurry.
Some of those very topics sparking more interest in the Buncombe County GOP, according to Chair Dr. Glenda Weinert.
Parents are becoming much more engaged initially and involved, but we're also seeing a tremendous amount of people actually saying, what can we do? How do we get involved?
She tells me she knows of parents considering runs for school board because they feel their opinions aren't valued.
Because it's easy to sit on the side and talk about it. It's a much different thing to get up and stand up for what you believe in.
And Dr. Cooper tells me that more candidates can be a good thing because it can lead to more competitive elections and a more diverse group of people serving in office.
Joining me once again, Dr. Lawrence Scott and Ms. Morbidio. Thank you both for joining us. You know, every successful, I don't think anybody will argue with this, but every successfully run school where achievement is off the chart starts with active parental involvement, Dr. Scott. You just cannot separate the two. Sir. How does that work best, however?
Yeah, so there's examples, clear examples all over America, right? You have your PTA, you have your campus leadership team, you have your site-based decision-making team. So there's clear examples of ways to engage parents. I think what has happened, and I think that this is much to the dismay of what's going on around the country, is that parents have felt emboldened, and I get it. I'm a parent, I understand. And I feel like parents have been emboldened to storm school boards. And I think that's again, a multi-systemic breakdown. I think we as school administrators and purveyors of the community and education, we need to do a better job of creating communicative valves so that parents can feel comfortable when they come in. I remember I used to tell my teachers and my staff, when a parent comes in, they should be greeted at least 6 times, right? So, they should feel like they're welcome. They should be greeted 6 times. There shouldn't be this adversarial relationship. So again, there are mechanisms in place to allow parents, and again, that site-based decision-making team, campus leadership team, your PTA, your district leadership team, there are ways for parents to get engaged. And I think that, following the procedures and protocols, I think that's the best way to do it.
Well, Angela, the principal in the school plays a very critical role. And what matters is that person's integrity and honor. Even in Loudoun County, Virginia, where I am, the superintendent and the principal was not transparent. When a parent felt their child was violated, they claimed it never happened until the record showed otherwise. So if integrity doesn't start at the top, and parents don't trust superintendents and principals in handling their kids, you're going to have exactly what Dr. Scott is speaking about.
The breakdown of trust is absolutely tragic and 100% unnecessary. And this is what you see happen when the administration that's currently in charge up in Washington has decided to go to great lengths to try and smear concerned parents as domestic terrorists. This is what happens when you have, as we saw when I was at the Department of Ed, there was a school district in Evanston, Illinois, that was taking teachers through these trainings that said, you were evil based on your race. And some people had signed a contract with the devil. And they went to great lengths to try to really just sort of harm the people that they were supposed to be serving. The integrity just breaks down. The trust is eroded to a point where nobody's learning anymore. And that is how a school fails. And that's why it is so important that we treat people equally based on race, based on sex, based on any sort of other protected characteristic where, you show up and you go to school and you should learn that all men are created equal. You should not learn that some people are created evil. This is where the breakdown of trust starts to happen. And it's why what people learn and the way they learn it is so critically important, as you mentioned, to have integrity all the way through.
Dr. Scott, I think when former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, in a debate said that parents really should not be involved in the education of children, it not only set off a siren in Virginia, but many parents felt emboldened that way because they feel they're ignorant, not informed, have nothing to add, and they're disruptors. And that's not the majority of parents. You're going to always have your fringe element, but for the most part, these parents love their kids and would never have them in an environment where they could not learn and foster it, where they work with the people that have the greatest impact on the outcome.
Right. Well, again, it's the teachers in the classroom are the content experts, right? When you go to get your certification, you're getting content enrichment, and you're getting what we call pedagogical content, how to teach it, how to teach the content. So I think what has happened, and when we talk about what has ushered and facilitated this breakdown, is that teachers are leaving the profession in droves because they feel like everyone is against them, whether it's the administrative team who's giving them the evaluation or the parents that are storming the school boards and saying that what the child, what their children are learning or how it's being taught is not correct, or it's so parents feel stymied and stifled. Teachers feel stymied and stifled, and I just think that again, to rebuild that trust, we got to be intentional, and it's going to start from the top down. It's going to start from your superintendent to your school board to your principal to the teachers and on down to the faculty and staff. And what they're going to have to do, they're going to have to be, when I say intentional, you're going to have more events, more ways of getting the information out, whether it's through social media, and then getting out in the community. As an administrator, I used to go to the quinceañeras and the bar mitzvahs, the weddings, and even the funerals. I've been a part of 13 funerals of students. So it's going to be that the ubiquity of the leadership to create the culture and climate of collaboration and collegiality that's going to work.
Angela, the rigor and the variety of the curriculum is very important for the student and also in the classroom. But one thing that parents push back against when they perceive that it's indoctrination.
Right, as well they should. There should be no room for indoctrination in the classroom. We want a facts-based education because first of all, it's the morally right thing to do for students. And second, because it's what's going to allow those students to grow up and compete in the 21st century economy. So for schools to really serve students, you got to keep politics out of the classroom, focus schools on their true educational mission and learning. And I want to speak to the earlier point about teachers and respecting teachers. Great teachers are a priceless resource in this country, and they ought to get more respect. They ought to be treated really, really well. And we see districts sometimes that just don't do that. They let their funding get absorbed by layers and layers of bureaucracy. Instead of rewarding teachers for their hard work, they pretend like, well, we're out of money. Well, you're out of money because there are so many layers of bureaucracy. That is a fixable problem, and it's something that ought to be handled at the local level in every district, across the country.
With the little time we have left, you wanted to comment in the earlier segment on Title IX, which you were a part of during the Trump administration.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to weigh in here. Yes, I was serving in the Trump administration when Secretary DeVos announced the 2020 Title IX rule. It's currently in force, and it protects all students. Now, the current administration is preparing to rewrite that rule, and the Defense of Freedom Institute is very, very concerned that in that rule, they could rob Title IX of a lot of its original meaning. Title IX is there to prevent discrimination based on sex, and they could try to make Title IX say something that it doesn't, which is make it all about gender identity. And that would lead to biological men competing in women's sports, as well as a host of other issues that would ultimately make students less safe. They claim that it's about inclusion, but inclusion is one thing. If you're including people and then treating them all unfairly, what have you really accomplished? So that's why we're going to be looking really, really closely about what is in this new proposed rule to make sure that the government must still protect all students' rights.
Thank you both again. Coming up, my final observations when we return to our crisis in the classroom town hall. Corey Alexander Walker joins us. Thank you so much for joining us from Madison, Wisconsin, Corey.
Thank you for having me.
Do you think there's a correlation between failing and underperforming schools and the recent spike in violent crime?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to look at. I mean, I think that there has to be a correlation somewhere. I think that when you look at schools that fail, usually they are in many of our most violent neighborhoods. And usually as students continue to struggle in school academically, they get frustrated, they believe school isn't for them. So where do they turn to? They turn to the streets. And if you get involved in things like drug dealing and criminal enterprises like that, that is an inherently violent enterprise. There's been so many kids over the course of this pandemic that have been dropping out of schools. You look in our inner cities, the truancy rate is through the roof. I mean, I would say it's our modern day civil rights issue. The fact that kids are not in school, predominantly Black, brown kids, predominantly poor kids. And so they're not getting education. So how else are they going to be able to, survive or get by or be able to, make a living? And so in many cases, they turn to the streets because that's the only other option they have. So I would say, yeah, there seems to be a very direct correlation here, and it's very troubling.
You cannot not have Buffalo on your mind. And being in Charleston, you cannot think about Mother Emanuel Church and the 9 who died. Similarly, this guy channeled Dylan Roof. This is the question. Where in all of this educational experience in the classroom does a Black kid think, for the most part, that he's inferior to the white person, therefore he can never really get and realize the American dream? And how does some white possessed demonic kid like the one in Buffalo believes that Black people are the source of his problem, that they're taking his way of life away, they're changing his trajectory, and the only solution that he has is to go on the internet, YouTube, to reinforce this, get an assault rifle, sit with a Black man for hours the day before you do the shooting, and the man said he's just as nice as he could be, but yet go into the store the next day and just blow people up for the simple reason that they're Black.
Yeah, I mean, what happened in Buffalo is extremely, extremely tragic and disgusting. And also, what you described with Black children viewing themselves as inferior is something that we see happen across the country. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way that we choose to obviously educate our children within our schools. When you tell Black children, look, we need to teach about the history of slavery and Jim Crow, because that is an important part of American history. It's one of the foundational elements of American history. But there's a lot of Black people who have succeeded and thrived in this country, even during Jim Crow, and we need to teach more of those stories as well. And, teach Black children that they can succeed, that they are, just as talented and capable. We need to stop this sort of victim mentality of teaching Black children that, you can't succeed because of racism or the white man or something that happened 60 years ago. Yes, I'm not going to come on your show and say racism doesn't exist. It does. We just saw it happen in Buffalo. And we also have evidence that, there's some bias in the criminal justice system. Bias exists, but kids can overcome it.
But what do you say? What do you say to these white teenagers who believe their way of life is threatened, and they go out and kill people and kill blacks for the same senseless, misguided, uneducated reasons?
Well, I think that for white kids, I could imagine that, listen, the reality is that the internet, because of the way algorithms work, in many ways, it can lead you to radicalization if unchecked. So I don't have the answers to essentially there is no like cure-all when it comes to that. But what I will say is that talking to those white kids, you have to understand that, obviously this is going to sound very generic, but all of us are the same. All of us are made in the eyes of God. All of us are beautiful. And I think that it's important to be able to understand that we're no different, even though we have different skin colors. And I think that's important to.
So your point is we should talk about what we have in common and emphasize that enough, not how we are different. Thank you, Corey. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate your wisdom on this topic. So when we hear something we know for certain, every child desires to learn. It is not a matter of money or resources. You must create a climate where children are driven to learn and their curiosity is aroused by their parents, teachers, and all other stakeholders must be involved in the creation of an environment that makes children eager to enter the classroom. If we can discover what motivates a student to be their best, our nation will be better for it.